They're welcome. Uh, so hi everybody, Shabbat Shalom. I hope you're having a good week and have kept cool with a little toasty um, out and about. And I appreciate you missing parts of the Olympics opening ceremony to do a little Torah, but if you have it on in the background, no problem. Uh, so we are it's been a little while, I think, since I've taught the class, but we are coming to not even in the middle. We're coming towards the end of the book of Numbers of Bamidbar. Um, and this is probably my favorite book in the Torah because it is the part where the honeymoon period is over, right? The Jews they're out of Egypt. They are in the wilderness, right? That's what Bamidbar means, in the wilderness, and it is literal and it is metaphorical as well. That things have started to get a little tough, and people have started to get very grouchy, and I think it shows the reality of what it is to try to be a people and to try to have a shared mission and goal. They're still trying to get to the promised land. They're still trying to live in certain ways based on the laws that God has given. But the reality is a lot tougher than the ideal. And we're very much in the reality at this moment. And so what comes with that are all sorts of challenges, challenges to authority, challenges to the particular directions that things have taken. And so I think it's a really fruitful stretch of the Torah for us to consider when we think about our lives and the realities and the hardships and the challenges that we experience. I think that it speaks to a lot of that, and not just this like fluffy ideal of what could be as opposed to what actually happens in the world. Um, so for this portion this week, so we're in Pinchas, which picks up immediately, like right in the middle, sort of in a story that the previous portion ended with. It picks it up right at the tail end. But the first question that I wanted to start with, for you to consider, and then share your thoughts. If you think of yourself in the way that you might go about leading things, do you have a particular leadership style? And what does that style of leadership look like? Rebecca, go for it.
I've actually been a manager, and I apologize for the noise outside. They're doing some construction if it's a little bit noisy. It's always been my feeling is to explain what the rules are, what the expectation is. And I've always felt that the people that I work with are professional and that they should have no problem following the rules and meeting the expectations, but that never really happened.
Got it. But communicating clear expectations and expecting those around you to be adults and to be able to follow simple enough instructions. Okay, and then the challenges that come along there. Yeah, Ben?
Thank you, Rabbi. I've always tried to lead or manage by setting very high standards, both for myself and everybody. And if you can't live up to it, we'll find somebody that can.
Okay, great. So this is a little more. So this is high expectations with sort of maybe not an expectation of failure, but a sort of like being comfortable with saying to people, okay, either you got it or you don't, and go from there. Okay, great. Anybody else? What is a leadership style that either a leadership style that you have, or a leadership style that you respect, that you've seen, that you think is effective, that you think works well? Susan?
I will defer to Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, as best as I can remember. A leadership style was to listen to other people and to take in their thoughts. Did someone? I came in a little late. Did someone say that already?
No, it's a great one.
Okay, so I apologize for that. But that was one of the things for the leadership, and humility too, as one of the things, that you don't know the answer and to potentially learn from other people. So that's kind of what I remember from prior readings.
Great.
Among
So
others.
taking an input, hearing what other people have to share, and having the humility to sort of step back and know when to learn from others and trust others. Got it. All right, Jonathan, you had a hand raised?
Yeah, well, my style was always to set up the processes and provide the resources that would enable the subordinates to do everything without my having to really be involved. So I guess it was kind of a deist leader where I was the god who didn't care. I would consider it maybe didactic and preparatory kind of a style.
Great. So give folks the resources and the opportunities that they need to be successful, and then let them take it from there.
Yeah.
Nice. That's great. Panina, you had a hand raised? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I always start by trying to pinpoint the positive things about the person or the situation that I'm trying to deal with. But I'm waiting first till I do a little bit of research on my own to see who am I talking to, and what is it that really would be attractive to them to hear, in order for them to open up to listen to the other part that may be a little bit teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So like yesterday, my daughter is allergic to milkweeds, and she loves to see the butterflies, when they eat, and they have cocoons and stuff. She has so many allergies, and she's been like wheezing and coughing for the last 3 days. So I went on Google yesterday, and I found out that it could be really bad allergies. But in the meantime, I also find out that Jim Morrison is buried in France. And she grew up in the time that, Jim Morrison, we have a picture of him in our basement and everything. So I started by telling her what I found out about Jim Morrison in France. And then I said, and then I looked up milkweeds and blah, blah, blah. And I put up the whole, said, look it up yourself. It could be really bad. And she did. I don't know. I didn't talk to her this morning. Hopefully she did take him outside, because it's really, really could be really bad allergies. So for those of you who are thinking about looking at cocoons and all this stuff, and you have allergies, check it out by yourselves. And
So figuring out what people want to hear, right? Connecting with people, finding something in common.
exactly.
And then once there's that kind of level there, then kind of pushing some of the other things that you are actually meant to be more of a directive. Got it.
And you leave it, actually, have most of it to them to figure it out on their own, but I could only suggest.
Great. So another example, making a suggestion without, sort of like opening the door and saying,
try it,
here's
and
a
see what
possibility.
happens. That's all. Yeah.
Got it. Susan, you had your
Rabbi?
hand raised?
Yeah. So another thing is to inspire people. I mean, some is if it wartime, how are you going to lead them? You're not a wimp, but to inspire people to a higher cause or to a collective cause, and to have a way to urge people to follow your direction. So, I mean, it could be a demigod, or it could be a good guy leading the people, but this is inspiration.
A participant also very important.
So inspiring people to, you're like, it's like, I think from an inspirational leader, often like it drawing people in, like it feels like they're connecting to something.
Sometimes
but
depends,
and further motivate them to
great.
the goals that you think are important. We also say, I mean, for orators, usually those who know how to speak well and inspire people that way have an advantage. But that's a leader, not a follower.
Got it. Brad, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, can you hear me? I'm outside and I apologize if there's
Yes,
some
we
noise.
can hear you, no problem.
But two things, leading by example,
Mhm.
that's one thing I tried to do. And the other is I had read this advice somewhere and it really stuck with me. Assess your strengths and weaknesses and delegate those areas that you're weak in and retain those areas that you're strong in. And that really helped me in my professional career.
Mm-hmm. Great. So also the action. So Susan was talking a little bit about how speaking, right, can be a way that inspires people and encourages people, but also leading by example, right? That your actions are a model to people, and it also shows, right, like you're invested in it too. You're not just talking about it. You're doing the things that matter. Great example. All right. So thinking about these ideas, I want us to I'm gonna pull up the text. So let me, whoops, share screen here. Whoops, 1 second. Okay, here we go. Can you all see this okay? Okay. So I want us to look at, I'll scroll real quick, just I don't want to give it away. So I want us to look at two different instances that happen in the Torah portion. We have to go a little for Pinchas, right? We kind of have to go back a little bit just for the last couple paragraphs from the last week's Torah portion to then the part where we wrap it up. But I want to look at two different, basically, I think, examples, case studies of leadership styles from two very different people who are approaching, they see a problem, they have a solution, and they go about it very different ways. So we'll compare. And again, thinking, and I think framing this within the book of Numbers, where at this point, there's been a lot of stuff that's come up, right? If you remember, there was already Moses has been removed from being able to come into the land of Israel because he struck the rock and he didn't do what God said. You had Korach, who mounted this massive rebellion. You have the general grumblings and complaining that the Israelites have now been doing for a couple, for like a complete generation. So we're kind of at a point where if this is the family road trip, you've been on the road for a while. And let's say we're about, 60% there. And everyone is just fidgety and has lost patience and can't really put up with what's going on in the car anymore. So this is sort of the moment that we're at in the book of Numbers. And it is a time where I think leadership becomes all the more critical. And so we will see how people choose to respond in these particular moments. Sound good? Okay, great. So who could someone read this first section for us?
I can read, Rabbi.
Okay.
While Israel was staying at Shittim,
Mhm.
the men profaned themselves by whoring with the Moabite women, who invited the menfolk to the sacrifices for their god. The menfolk partook of them and worshipped that god. Thus Israel attached itself to Baal Peor, and Adonai was incensed with Israel. Adonai said to Moses, "Take all the ringleaders and have them publicly impaled before Adonai, so that Adonai's wrath may turn away from Israel." So Moses said to Israel's officials, "Each of you slay those men who have attached themselves to the Baal Peor."
Okay, great. So what's happening here, I'm not sure, did y'all look at this text last week in Torah study? No, okay, great. So what has happened is the Israelites they're on the road. They're around all these other people. You have the Moabites and Midianites. And so they have been sort of drawn in to worshiping other gods. So Baal Peor is like the chief god, is like the Zeus of the Moabite Midianite gods. So the Israelites some of them have started to worship other gods. And this is a problem, right? One of the key rules, right, principles for the Israelites, for the Jews, is there is one God. It is only the God of Israel. You don't worship other gods. You don't follow other gods. So this is a massive problem. And what has happened, I think, I'm gonna skim real quick because I can't remember. So we missed a part, I think it was a little bit before this, where so they have been following these other gods, and a plague descended and was harming all the people of Israel because God was so angry. God sent a plague. So there are terrible repercussions. God is clearly angry, right? So what is the directive that God gives to Moses for the people who have broken these rules? Is to take the ringleaders and have them publicly impaled. Pretty extreme. Yeah. So first off, why is this such a problem for the Israelites at this point?
Well, it's not clear to me in verse 2
Mm-hmm.
what sacrifices for what God? Because
The
God is
Moabite gods.
in small case letters and it's not written as Adonai. So what is that? That's my first question. I don't understand.
So that's Baal Peor, the Midianite god, a Moabite Midianite god. Right? So they're committing idolatry, is what's happening. So why does that seem like such a problem at this point in the story? Panina?
Yeah, well, the land was supposed to be the promise of believing in the one God. That's what God told Abraham. "Lecha natati et haaretz hazot." I gave you that land, and that was the first condition. So here they are. First of all, they actually chose not to go in with all the stories that they came back and told Moses. And then not only that, but because they are walking away from the land, they're also walking away with the idea of the one God. They're going back to idols. It's like Abraham's promise was no longer, I wouldn't say valid. I would say kind of like it made a hole, like in a whole plan.
Right.
The
So
fact that they didn't go in and they didn't get to go in, it created a void of the whole purpose. So they went back to the idol worshiping, which was what you call a double whammy.
Right. So they haven't gone into the land of Israel yet. And you remember that there was when they sent the scouts and they said the people are really scary and giant over there. We should not go over there. We should go someplace else. Except for the two scouts that said, no, it's fine. It's great. We can do it. We can overcome anything with God's help. But right. So if we go back to their undercutting, like the foundational covenantal promise, I will be your God and you will be my people and I will take you to the promised land. And if you're going with other gods, you're undercutting all of that. Benjamin, you want to jump in?
Thank you. I agree. They were acting bad. The idol worship or other gods, kind of horn around with what have you. And this is not really an answer to your question, Rabbi, but great leadership technique to execute. Make an example of one or two in the group, and then everybody is going to be they'll fall in line if you make an example like that. And this public impaling is quite a good visual as an example.
Right. So this is a clear, there's got to be something done. We're gonna like sometimes there's times to be kind and understanding, and sometimes there's time to be swift and severe and make a point and then move on. And I think, and you bring up a good, so I wanted to add this as well. So the part where they're whoring, so please note the verb to whore, basically, in Hebrew, like is very interesting because it's used a lot with idolatry. That's actually the it's like a metaphorical term that is often goes back to that's how idolatry is described, because it's this act of infidelity, that the Jewish people and the God of Israel are united, and so to turn to other gods is to be unfaithful to that relationship. And so it's real. So it has this additional thing of, what exactly were the men doing with it? Clearly they were hanging around. They were doing things that they shouldn't be doing. But but the core problem was that they were being unfaithful to God through all of that. Great. Susan, you had your hand raised, and then Jonathan.
Yeah, absolutely. In idolatry is, they had the Ten Commandments, and idolatry is one of the major no-nos. They had a prior example with the golden calf. Now, that wasn't necessarily whoring around, but it was worshiping an idol. And what happened? It wasn't a good story for the men there. And so and then interestingly, this happens right after Balaam, he blesses the people. Then right away, the men go and do this. And I know that adultery is also combined with idolatry in terms of a major no-no. And this was even more than adultery. Actually, adultery is just another man's wife. But these are, one could even say, if they weren't priestesses, at least they were women who lured men to this. And it's interesting, the women, people complain that the Torah has such a bad rap for women, but the women didn't participate, the Jewish women or the Israeli women in this, or in the golden calf, so. And then they know what's going to happen. It will bring problems for the whole society, for the rest of the Israelites. And so it's a major concern. And in fact, they know that it arouses God's wrath, and God will have a plague fall on them for that. So that all the other people, experience this plague, which is disgusting.
Yeah, and I think, and as you're saying all that, I think there's like this real element of short-sightedness, right?
Yes.
Like not putting it into a bigger perspective. And I think especially what you were saying, right? Thinking right after the blessing from Balaam, which is this beautiful moment, right? As part of, like liturgy, right? Matovu, that we still sing in for morning prayers. And there's this, and that's part of the themes of Numbers, is it's a very, what have you done for me lately mentality. That there can be these beautiful blessings and even like, like punishments, like things like when you step out of line, there are punishments. So it's very clear, like the path that God is taking with all this. And yet there's still, every time a choice to go off the wrong path comes, there seems to be, they're kind of forgetting what came before, and they're kind of forgetting what's supposed to come after. Great. Jonathan, you had your hand raised?
Well, yeah, just to the point that this punishment is kind of intense and so on. With the publicly impaling, kind of reminded me of like Dracula, where he was actually Vlad the Impaler, and he got famous for putting people up on stakes in front of the castle, and there was like no crime in his kingdom and so on. That to say publicly impale somebody is like a very powerful sort of psychological statement there, and maybe even more than a hole opening up in the earth and swallowing up Korah, because that could be a natural disaster or something like that. But to have your leader actually putting stakes through people is pretty intense. But to your point also about like the fact that they've been doing this for 40 years. So they've already seen all the miracles. They've already been fed when there was no food. They've already won all these battles they shouldn't have won. And at the same time, they've already been going through all this suffering of being out in the wilderness and out in the difficulties, suffering violence and all that. But suffering is supposed to teach wisdom, circumspection, long endurance, willpower, all this stuff. So if you've seen all the miracles and you've suffered all the trials and you're at the doorway of your goal and you've just been blessed and you still don't get it, like you still don't know that God did this, then like let's
try
really
public
left?
impaling
Like
at this point.
what can be done to cause any kind of effect? What can get through to you now? And so I don't really think the impaling, I mean, it is intense, but it kind of fits in a certain sort of a way, to me. I mean, it's the most intense thing you can do, and it's kind of gross, but it's what else could you do at this point? If your goal is to scare people away from false gods and get people to follow Hashem, then it doesn't really necessarily seem like it's that unreasonable of an answer, to me. Right.
So it might be extreme, but it seems that we've come to a moment where extremes might be the only thing that communicate here.
Because you're at the door, you only have a few shots left, and you've already seen oceans part, and 10 guys killed thousands of guys, and you've seen everything. So what's left? And you're right there. You've only got one or two more things you can do, and then and so I sort of see that as like a last straw cavalry charge, kind of an effort there. That's how I see that.
Got it. All right. So it's a great transition. I want to jump down to the rest of, we got to finish the what comes next. All right. Does someone want to read these next sections?
Well, I'll read.
Okay.
Just then, a certain Israelite man came and brought a Midianite woman over to his companions. In the sight of Moses and of the whole Israelite community who were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. When Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the priest, saw this, he left the assembly, and taking a spear in his hand, he followed the Israelite man into the chamber and stabbed both of them, the Israelite man and the woman, through the belly. Then the plague against the Israelites was checked. Those who died of a plague, okay. Then the plague against the Israelites was checked. Those who died of the plague numbered 24,000. Whoa.
Let's do
okay.
this next section as well.
Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the Israelites by displaying among them his passion for me, so that I did not wipe out the Israelite people in my passion. Say therefore, I grant him my pact of friendship. It shall be for him and his descendants after him a pact of priesthood for all time, because he took impassioned action for his God, thus making expiation for the Israelite.
Great. All right. So as we were talking about, that maybe it makes sense that this is the punishment. It's all fair and good. And as soon as God said, okay, the next person who does this, you're going to publicly impale them. And lo and behold, off they go walking through the middle of the camp, as brazen and obvious as you like. And Pinchas, does what? And he does exactly what God just said. He said, publicly impale them.
Yeah.
What do you think, Penina? You got your hand raised.
I have here something that we are overlooking. When what's his name, Bilam and his donkey were there, they did not see the people that we're talking about now in the desert. He looked at the tribes that never left and were living there in peace, and they were planting and doing whatever it is that they were doing, but they lived in peace. And it was a nation that was there already. So we're talking about the ones who left Egypt, not the ones that stayed, the tribes that stayed. So here you have a problem here. Not only that they weren't ready themselves, but they are trying also to poison the whole image that was there already by, it's like going back after all these generations that settled there and had this connection to the land and were practicing their religion. Here comes all these people that came along with Aaron and Moses, and they want not only that it's going to be bad for them, but if they would have gone in, they would have also make a mess to the people who never even was in Egypt and was living their lives and prospering over there and living in peace with the other nation. Otherwise, they wouldn't even exist. Or
so I want to loop back over to Pinchas. So
we have to,
here's the question.
So the idea is that not only that they weren't ready, but there was also the danger of them ruining it for the other people that were already there and living a life. So that's why the punishment was so severe, because it's like not only they're ruining it for other people.
So here's a question. So hold on. So here's a question that I want us to go to is Panina, hold on.
Dismissed. And that's
hold
not
on,
good.
hold on. All right. So here's the question that I want us to come to is, so if we think of, is Pinchas acting in this moment? Like if we think about the leadership qualities that we were talking about before, all the things that we think are worthwhile, things that we do, things that we've learned, all sorts of things. What is Pinchas? Is he demonstrating any of these, and what would those be? Brad, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, what's always troubled me about this is that we learn a little bit later on that Cosby, the woman, is a Midianite princess.
Yes.
So she is not a cult prostitute, and which was, typical in these idolatrous cults, like the cult of Dionysus, for example. So you wonder if there's some political thing going on here. Is she being instrumentalized by her father? Isn't she, in a sense, a victim? And so I wonder about Pinchas's reaction in terms of impaling her, if there isn't some way to think of her also as a victim.
So yes, that's a great point of how do we think about her? Because at the end of the day, she's not the one necessarily who's breaking the rules. It's the Israelite man who is the one who is breaking the rules. And I think that also, and you're right, and it points to this interesting question of both, like, what are the threats, right, of Israelites who have sort of gone away from the community, who have gone off the path that we've been told to take. For one, right, we were told there is one God and you worship that one God. And then the other is also thinking like, okay, well, we know that the Midianites and the Moabites there's not always peace in getting along here. So is there some kind of, this broader political issue between these peoples that is also taking place as well? And how can we think about what is her involvement? And is it something that is, did she warrant this kind of violence? Or is it something just that that the Israelite man was the one breaking the rules and it should have just been his problem? Benjamin, I saw you had a hand raised. Did you want to add?
Just back to your question about leadership and Pinchas, which is actually my Hebrew name, but Pinchas, he's being a good leader in that he's sort of following the example and I think we talked about leadership principles, following examples, setting high standards. I mean, God impales all these people and then he goes and does it this help God's message. That makes sense. So he's leading and following and
God
doing.
said you should impale them, and the people who break the rules, you should impale them. He sees someone breaking the rules, he goes and impales them.
It's a good leader. Follow,
There
follow
you
the
go.
direction of the boss.
Right. And how does God respond? Right? What is God's
Doesn't Pinchas get rewarded with this all this stuff? So
Yeah, right. So he not only turns back God's wrath against the Israelites and removing the plague, and God makes a pact of, so what it is, it's Briti Shalom, right? Which is interesting. So that it's translated as friendship here, but it's God's pact of peace with Pinchas, which is, an important thing, right? This is almost like a separate covenant that is made just with Pinchas and his descendants. It shall be for him and his descendants as a pact of priesthood. This will be part of like he's a grandson of Aaron, so he's and his family are a priestly family. Because he took impassioned action for his God, right? Another translation for impassioned here. What do you all think? What might be another translation for this impassioned adjective here?
quick, decisive.
Okay, what else? Zealous.
Maybe the lesson is not to act when you are angry.
So
And-
he took zealous action, right? He's a zealot. This is something that we tend to think about as not the kind of stuff that we want to, zealotry is not usually thought about in a positive way, right? And yet here God is saying, this was important enough that the way that he acted here was good and important and should be remembered forever as a good thing. It's a little extreme. Okay, so if we think of Pinchas, if we were thinking, what is his leadership style?
Forgiveness, maybe. Being forgiving, being peaceful.
Pinchas is forgiving and peaceful?
Well, he said that he could have, but he didn't, right?
No, he did.
Oh, he did do.
He stabbed him.
He was very zealous.
Yeah.
Very confident.
So, okay. So force
Yeah,
is
I
the
mean,
lesson.
he was,
I don't know if this really works, but it's
he was
okay.
following the company line. He was going with the program.
Gotcha.
He's on the same page. He's in the game.
Okay.
Yeah, he's
off the sidelines.
He's a good lieutenant, right? He follows orders and he does them quickly and effectively and all that. Susan, you have a hand raised?
Well, yes, his left leadership, I thought it was interesting, his style.
Right.
Yeah, so it's more, and although, I mean, I think there's good in what he was doing because he was saving the people with that, but it was less leadership in the sense that inspiring people, maybe it was inspiring people to be zealous as well. So, but God also often says, "But I am an impassioned God," and zealous could be jealous as well. And we know that God's style, that he tells you he's impassioned and he's zealous. So we have a kind of a follower in that respect as God.
Yeah.
But it's not so much, I don't know, I guess vigilantes and the like can have that as a leadership style. You should do this like me, but otherwise it wasn't, follow me guys, we're gonna all impale these miscreants.
And that's a great connection there too, right? So kine, the word right here. So this is the same word for jealous, right? So there is something similar that God self-describes, God's self, right? So that's a really interesting connection too. And I think goes back as well, this idea of him as the company man, right? He's like, God has made clear, here's what you do, and here's why you do, and follow in God's ways. Well, jealous.
Yeah, but in this particular section, God is showing himself that he is the good one. Pinchas was the one who was very zealot and blah, 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 but God says, but I am still did this and this and this for you, and I'm still going to do that and that and that for you. So he's showing like a contrast that
I don't think so. I think God is saying Pinchas was on the money.
Right on. The next one, he lauds Pinchas. Look at this. He has this, he has turned back my wrath by displaying what is my wrath from the Israelites.
so he's the good guy. He turned back my wrath. So
So,
he's not the good guy. Okay.
he
That's what I'm trying to say. That it still shows that he's in charge. That's all.
Okay, hold on. So Brad, then you wanted to jump in as well?
Yeah, I need you to refresh my memory here. I mean, who was instructed to do this? Was it not Moses? And did Pinchas take this upon himself to do it? I don't recall exactly what the chain of command is here.
So that's a great question, right? So God instructs Moses, who has gathered all of, so God says to Moses, take the ringleaders, the people who've been doing this, and publicly impale them. And Moses then says to Israel's officials, each of you, like the chiefs, the leaders, slay those of his men who attach themselves to this other God. And then Pinchas, right? So he's part of that. He's a priest. He's a grandson of Aaron. So Pinchas was not told by Moses, through God, oh, Pinchas, go and stab that guy right now. But he had just gotten the order where Moses said, God said, each of you should go kill the people who do this. And then the guy goes walking by. But it's an interesting question of, was he commanded to do it? Or was there some degree of taking it on his own? I think Rebecca's got an answer to this.
Well, it's a continuation of the story of Baal Peor. So in Baal Peor, it's the Moabites, and then it goes on then to talk about the Midianites. And so it's kind of an assumption that the Midianites are going to be acting in the same fashion as the Moabites in terms of sexual immoral acts and praying to other types of gods. It just seems like it's a continuation of the Moabite story to me.
Yeah. So there is a little bit earlier, it does say the Midianite and the Moabite people were involved in this. But it's a good point of, just making sure, like, was this a carryover? Was this a spillover from something else that was a little like overly sensitive to something? Or was it actually, what these people were doing as well? It's a good to keep in mind. Susan, you wanted to?
Yeah, so I say this is an example of extreme arrogance. And they're going, right after you see the two sentences, each of you slay those men who attach themselves. And then right after the next sentence, these two say, whatever, bad word to you, we're going to do what we want. And flaunt you. This is flaunting, and they did it right in front of the whole community. So much for you. And I think it was so flagrant that it really needed a tough response.
And it was also like right when they were weeping. So they had gotten this horrific or at least massively intense command from God to do this amazingly drastic thing, and the people were in shock and crying about having to do this, and then those guys run right up in the middle. I think it's sort of like when the commandment went out, and then everybody started crying. I guess maybe they were thinking, well, I guess they're not going to obey God if they were crying, and couldn't bring themselves to do this. So I guess we're okay. And they went right out in front. And that was when Pinchas did his thing, Yeah.
Well, and that's a good point too, right? They were weeping. They were also possibly weeping because there had been this massive plague, right? So these things that these people were doing, members of their tribes were doing, was causing great suffering. And as they're trying to figure out, okay, well, what do we do? How do we respond to this crisis? And then you got this couple sauntering right through the middle. It's bold, to say the least. Brad, you wanted to say something as well?
Well, and yet there's some nagging sense in my head that he's acting impetuously.
Sure.
And to me, that's a negative. I guess you could also look at it that he's taking action and see it in a positive sense. But there's some ambiguity, it seems to me, in the immediacy of the response.
Yeah, and I think that's fair as well. That there's something, just because this could be done doesn't mean it needed to be done or done in that way. Yeah. So I want to make sure we have time. So as I said before, we have two examples. So this is example number one of a particular leadership style. If there was a problem, a solution was needed, and it was carried out in a very particular way. So then we get to the end of the Torah portion, and we get a very different leadership move. And I'd be willing to bet that this group has studied the daughters of Zelophehad before at some point. Yes. All right. So why don't we read about them? Someone want to read this section?
I guess I can.
Okay, go for it.
The daughters of Zelophehad of Manassite family, son of Hephor, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, son of Joseph, came forward. The names of the daughters were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the chieftains, and the whole assembly at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and they said, "Our father died in the wilderness. He was not one of the faction, Korah's faction, which banded together against Adonai, but died for his own sin and has left no sons. Let not our father's name be lost to his clan just because he had no son. Give us a holding among our father's kinsmen."
Great. So what's happening here is that each family, right, within each tribe, within the tribes, there's smaller families. They're all given a portion in the Promised Land, in the land of Israel. But as was originally written, only sons could inherit the property from their fathers. So in this case, there's a man that had that had only daughters, and based on the laws of inheritance as was given initially by God to the Israelites, they can't inherit, which basically means that their family land, which is in the land of Israel, which they haven't gotten to yet, but when they get there, will go to someone else, and it won't be part of their family anymore. So the daughters go, and they say to Moses and all the leaders, "Our father has died. He wasn't part of Korah, so the faction, the people who were involved in Korah's rebellion, forfeited some of their inheritance rights because of their actions, and they're saying he wasn't one of them. He died, in a different way, and we don't want his name to be lost. Please, can we have that land?" So then we hear. So then why don't we, Susan? You want to read this next section just to wrap up? So then what happens?
Sure. So Moses brought the case before Adonai, and Adonai said to Moses, "The plea of Zelophehad's daughters is just. You should give them a hereditary holding among their father's kinsmen. Transfer their father's share to them. Now, further, speak to the Israelite people as follows. If a householder dies without leaving a son, you shall transfer his property to his daughter. If he has no daughter, you shall assign his property to his brothers. If he has no brothers, you shall assign the property to his father's brothers. If his father had no brothers, you shall assign his property to his nearest relative in his own clan, who shall inherit it. This shall be the law of procedure for the Israelites in accordance with Adonai's command to Moses."
Okay, great. So the daughters come, they plead their case to Moses. Moses takes it to God, because this was, a law that God issued, so only God can change it. And God says the plea of these daughters is just. They should have a holding from that their father would have had. And then God changes the law of inheritance so that at least daughters, not other women in the line, but at least daughters can inherit property from their fathers. So what is so let's take the daughters of Zelophehad. What is their leadership style in play? What is their leadership
great,
style?
great that, Moses' leadership was he took it, before this, he took it to God. He said, I can't deal with this. So he took it to a higher power. But we're not all so lucky that we could speak to God and get an answer from God like Moses did, although we could take it to a higher power. And then these girls, these young women, they took it upon themselves. And they did it not by killing anybody, although that wouldn't have helped, but they did it by rational presentation to Moses. They were like lawyers backing up their claims. So it was a very rational procedure, and their leadership was to take I wouldn't say bull by the horns, but take the issue by what it was and present it to the chief leader.
Great, right. They brought it to Moses. They expressed it in a very clear and practical way. And then Moses said, well, let me take it to my supervisor, right? And goes to God, and God says, sounds like a good plan. So it's a little bit about when you were talking about what Jonathan Sacks talked about leadership as listening to other people, right? And hearing their input. This is maybe something like that. Brad, you wanted to jump in? And Brad, Benjamin, Rebecca. Whoops, sorry. Wait, sorry, you gotta unmute, Brad.
Yeah. Moses earlier was chastised by his father-in-law his Midianite father-in-law for not delegating. So the question here is, why isn't Moses delegating this decision? And why is he pushing it back up to God? And this is in contrast to what's just happened with where it's not God who ends up taking that action against the couple, but it's Pinchas. So here it's a delegation issue, and something for which Moses has previously been criticized for not delegating.
So it's a great question. So in this case, right? So the daughters have come and they've said, we view this law from God as not being just. Can we do something different? So the only way to change a law from God is to go to God directly.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is one of you're absolutely right that why doesn't Moses just delegate and say somebody else deal with this property dispute? Right. But this is going back to the core of the justness, the fairness of this law. And only God can change that because it came straight from God.
Very good.
Benjamin, you want to jump in?
Thank you, Rabbi, and hope I'll see everybody tonight for the Brigade Shabbat and taco night at 5 o'clock at synagogue. But my point was, there's a form of leadership when you see a wrong, you stand up against a wrong and try to make it right. So these sisters saw this wrong. They're not able to inherit as men can. They bring it up, and passively they create change by appealing to authorities or appealing to justice, whatever that is. And it reminds me of like a passive resistance, like a MLK or some other examples in history as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's interesting as you say passive, because they are direct, but what they're not is like antagonistic.
Not violent. Right? They're direct. This is a wrong.
Yeah.
Here's why it's wrong. And this higher, Moses, God, whoever should correct it because it's just not right.
Right, exactly. And I think it's interesting in contrast to, like, if we think about Korah, who also saw it wrong, but Korah's response was to go to Moses and Aaron and say, who are you? Who put you in charge? Right? And that's sometimes it's not the question that's being asked, it's how you ask the question, right? And saying like, who made you rulers over us versus we think there might be a way to change something so that we can remember our father better and hold on to his legacy, right? Those are two very different ways to bring up a change.
But to get respect or to get righteousness, you have to give respect and give righteousness. So
Exactly.
they're
Yes.
honoring these leaders, what have you, by showing, hey, you decide, help us decide, or figure it out, and they get it. They get the respect back.
Yeah. So it's right, like it's very strategic in that way, right? They're playing the game. They're not trying to subvert it, right? They're trying to
They're trying to show that the same way that the people couldn't get it right away, that the law itself could be changed or could be adjusted or could be more fair. And maybe if they'll fix that, then the people would react differently also. So there was room here for everybody to grow. Even the priest here, kind of by the decision to give them their part, shows that there was room for the system to change, to grow. So it could appease it and could be working together with the people. And I think that was one way to showing a little bit more humanity, to show them that they understand that maybe the law is not perfect, that there is room to change.
Right. And that even God can hear that kind of feedback.
Exactly.
I want to make sure I know, Rebecca, you had your hand raised. I want to make sure we get to your point. No, you're good. Okay. So I think something important as well that I want to highlight is that part of, like, when we talk about the issue, when we were talking before about the issue, the Israelites sort of, all the punishments and all the blessings weren't making it clear to them, right? Like, it was this short-sighted, stubborn approach, and in all these rebellions and everything, that they lost sight of what the point of this was. And the point of all this at the end of the day was to make it to the promised land, was to be there and live in the ways that God commanded us. And the daughters of Zelophehad, they're saying, right, they have their eyes on the prize. They're saying, when we get to the land, we want to make sure that we still have this property that goes with our family. We want to remember our father and his lineage. And so part of what they're presenting to Moses is not in conflict, is not in contrast with his goal. It's actually saying, we have the same goal. Can we just tweak it a little bit so that we better fit into that vision of the future? And I think that's a really powerful style of leadership, whether it's done, organically or strategically, but to really, actually, it was kind of something Panito was saying, right? Like, of thinking of, what is this person that I want to, what does this person want? What are they looking for? And how can I blend myself into it, while working towards what I want too? And, like, what are my goals as well? And I think it's a really insightful leadership move that they show, of, like, we're invested in this shared endeavor. We just need you to help us out a little bit to get there.
And it also
Brad,
strengthens again the connection between the law, the Torah, and the land.
Absolutely. Brad,
yeah, Rabbi, where in the Torah does it say that property passes to the sons?
So that was back in Exodus when they got the laws at Sinai.
And I mean, where exactly does it say that? In what Torah? I'd be interested in reading the passage.
Let's see. I'm just pulling up the commentaries real quick just to see. Sometimes they can help you with the.
It started when Isaac gave the
That's not God. That's not God's
so
law.
it
I
comes
want to
from
see where
God.
God's law is.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
It is. Let's see. It's
Isn't there
definitely
something that of the human in through when God commands us, it says it's going to be divided between the 12 tribes, and then it says something about that of where they will be, and then how we will decide, and then there's a human and zooming in there too.
So it is somewhere in, I don't have it here, but I will try to look it up. but it is in Exodus when they are told like you will have like families will have the inheritance, and there are property laws that say, and it will from fathers to sons, and that's the main from fathers to sons. If there are no sons, then to other members of the family. But that's where
When
the law
God told
starts.
Abraham to take his firstborn, wasn't that already kind of like the
Right, but it's more explicit in the act in
Right.
Exodus. I just can't
Okay.
find the actual
For
verses
the
right now.
additional sons and the like. So, and then there was also the issue of Reuben and God on the other side, where Moses then had to inquire about that was okay. So there was commanded beforehand and understood that there would be inheritance according to the tribes. And then the question of where and how much land would be determined by the people or by Moses, however it was.
Right. But all this being said, it's 1:03, so I want to be mindful of your time. But I think this is just an example. I think there are times when Torah seems very arcane and harder for us to put ourselves into that place. But I think when we think about like what are the examples of how to lead, how to get people to come along with us, how to be part of a collective, a collaboration, a shared endeavor that we're all a part of as Jewish people. Torah has stuff to teach us, or at the very least, some food for thought for us to consider. So thanks so much for joining. It was great to see you all and study with
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Wish
you,
Shabbat
Rabbi.
Shalom. And
Thank you. Shabbat
hope I'll
Shalom.
see
Thank
you
you so
soon.
much. It's been wonderful as always.
Thank you.
Wasn't Jacob the one that divided the thing to the sons? He had one daughter, he didn't leave her anything.
No,
Jacob
it was
did.
so this is more in Exodus once we get the fuller laws.
Okay.
Yeah.
The
All
double portion was Deuteronomy 21:17. I just found it after everybody left, but
Oh, did you?
mhm.
Okay.
All right.
Take
Well,
care,
Shabbat
Shabbat.
Shalom, everyone. Good to see you.